The docking clamps of Forward Station Kepler 7 grabbed hold with a metallic screech that made David Brennan's teeth ache. He watched through the viewport as the military transport finished its connection to the ancient station, rust flaking off the outer hull like dead skin. This place looked exactly like what it was. A graveyard floating in the asteroid belt. His new home. Dad, is that really it? Emily's voice was small beside him. His 14-year-old daughter pressed her face against the glass, her breath fogging the viewport. It looks like it's falling apart. David forced a smile he didn't feel. It's got good bones, sweetheart. Just needs some work. The truth sat heavy in his chest like a stone. This wasn't just any posting. This was the bottom of the barrel. The place they sent soldiers who couldn't cut it anymore. The place they sent failures. Lieutenant Harris waited at the airlock with 2 junior officers, their crisp uniforms making David feel even more aware of his civilian clothes and the pronounced limp in his left leg. The injury that ended his career. The reason they were here instead of on a decent colony world where Emily could have friends and a real school. Well, Sergeant Brennan. Harris didn't bother hiding the smirk on his face. Sorry, I mean Mr. Brennan now, right? Heard you couldn't hack it in the field anymore. He glanced at Emily and his smile widened. Bringing your kid to live in this dump? That's rough, man. From combat operations to babysitting an empty station with your daughter. How the mighty have fallen. The other officers snickered. David's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He'd learned that lesson the hard way over the past year. Fighting back only made things worse. Harris tossed him a data chip. Here's your access codes. Station's been offline for 20 years. Life support barely works, water recycling is sketchy, and half the systems are fried. But hey, it's a roof over your head, right? He leaned in closer, voice dropping. Between you and me, I'd rather be homeless than stuck out here in the middle of nowhere. But I guess beggars can't be choosers. Emily's hand slipped into David's, squeezing tight. She'd heard every word. We'll manage, David said quietly. Sure you will. Harris turned to leave, then paused. Oh, one more thing. Station was sealed up after some classified incident. Something about failed experiments. They never told us what exactly, but people died here. Sweet dreams. The military transport undocked 30 minutes later, leaving them alone. Completely alone. The nearest inhabited station was 3 days away by shuttle. Supply ships came once a month. For everything else they were on their own. David watched Emily explore their new quarters, trying to put on a brave face. The living space was small, just 3 connected rooms. The walls were stained with age and several of the light panels flickered weakly. Her bedroom had a cracked window that looked out over the asteroid field, rocks tumbling slowly through the darkness like frozen tears. I can make this work, she said, setting down her backpack. Her voice wavered just slightly. It's actually kind of cozy. And look, I can see the stars really clearly from here. David's heart broke a little more. She was trying so hard to be strong for him. At 14 she shouldn't have to do that. She should be worried about school and friends and normal kid things. Not whether the life support system would keep working through the night. He pulled her into a hug. I'm sorry, Em. You deserve so much better than this. She hugged him back fiercely. We've made it through worse, Dad. After Mom died, we made it through that. We can handle anything as long as we're together. His wife. Emily's mother. Lost during the frontier collapse 5 years ago when their colony was evacuated. The memory still hurt like an open wound. The war had taken so much from so many people. It had taken his wife, his career, and now apparently his dignity too. They spent the rest of that first day trying to make the station livable. David managed to get the water system running properly and fixed the worst of the heating issues. Emily organized their belongings and tried to clean years of dust and grime from the surfaces. By evening they were both exhausted. They ate a quiet dinner of rehydrated rations in the small galley, neither saying much. The station groaned and creaked around them, metal expanding and contracting, systems straining to keep functioning after 2 decades of neglect. Every sound made David tense. This place felt wrong somehow. Empty but not quiet. Abandoned but not quite dead. Dad. Emily's voice cut through his thoughts. Why was this station really shut down? Lieutenant Harris said people died here. David had been wondering the same thing. The official records were sparse. Forward Station Kepler 7 had been a military research outpost during the war. Then suddenly, 20 years ago, it was decommissioned. Sealed up. Classified. The files didn't say why. I don't know, sweetheart. But it's over now. Whatever happened here, it's ancient history. That night, David lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Through the walls, he could hear the station's life support system rattling along, barely adequate for 2 people. His service weapon sat in the drawer beside his bed. He'd brought it even though he had no real reason to. Force of habit from 20 years in the military. Around 2 in the morning, Emily appeared in his doorway, her face pale in the dim emergency lighting. "Dad, do you hear that?" He sat up, instantly alert. "Hear what?" "Listen." He did. At first, there was nothing but the usual station noises. Then he caught it. A deep, rhythmic sound. Metallic. Mechanical. Coming from somewhere below them. Something was moving down there in the sealed lower levels. Something that had been silent for 20 years was suddenly awake. And it was trying to reach them. David stood in the corridor outside Emily's room, his ear pressed against the cold metal wall. The sound was faint but unmistakable. A rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat echoing up from the depths of the station. Emily stood beside him in her pajamas, arms wrapped around herself against the chill. "It's been going on for an hour," she whispered. "I thought I was imagining it at first." David pulled up the station schematic on his handheld tablet, the blue glow illuminating their faces in the darkened hallway. His finger traced the layout of Forward Station Kepler 7. 3 levels of living quarters and operations on top. Then, separated by a massive blast door, 5 sealed levels below. The lower section was marked in red with warning symbols he recognized from his military days. Biohazard. Restricted access. Authorized personnel only. "There shouldn't be anything down there," he said, more to himself than to Emily. The whole lower section was permanently sealed. No power, no life support, nothing. But even as he said it, another hollow thump resonated through the floor beneath their feet. Something was definitely down there. And whatever it was had power enough to make noise. Emily shivered. What if someone's trapped down there? What if they need help? After 20 years? David shook his head. Nobody could survive that long without supplies. Still, the sound continued. Regular. Insistent. Almost like someone was trying to signal them. The next morning, David sent a detailed report to Central Command. He described the sounds, the timing, everything. Then he waited. 6 hours for the message to reach headquarters. 6 more hours for a response. In the meantime, he tried to keep busy with routine maintenance, but his mind kept drifting to those sealed levels below. The response finally came through just after dinner. The message was brief and dismissive. Structural stress normal in aging stations. Thermal expansion and contraction of metal components. Continue standard operations. Command out. David read it twice, his frustration building. They weren't even taking it seriously. Just another washed-up soldier jumping at shadows in an empty station. But Emily wasn't convinced either. While David wrestled with broken climate control systems, she'd been busy at the station's ancient computer terminal in the operations center. Most of the files were locked behind military encryption, but there were fragments. Pieces of information that hadn't been properly scrubbed. "Dad, you need to see this," she called out on the 3rd day. David found her surrounded by glowing screens, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the natural ease of someone who'd grown up with technology. She'd managed to access partial mission logs from 20 years ago. "Look at this." She pointed to a corrupted text file. References to something called Project Sanctuary. And here, mentions of refugee intake and long-term containment protocols. Why would a military research station need containment protocols for refugees? David leaned closer, his heart beginning to pound. He recognized some of the military codes in the files. Emergency measures from the frontier collapse. The dark days when billions of people were displaced, fleeing the war zones in whatever ships they could find. Emily pulled up another file, this one mostly corrupted but with a single image intact. It showed a vast chamber lined with rows of cylindrical pods. Hundreds of them, each one large enough to hold a person. Cryosleep pods. "Emily, stop." David's voice came out harsher than he intended. "These are classified files. You shouldn't be accessing them." "Why not? We live here now. Don't we have a right to know what happened?" "Because some things are classified for good reasons." He ran his hand through his hair, memories flooding back. The war. The impossible choices. During the collapse, there were millions of refugees. More people than ships to carry them. Some facilities tried experimental solutions. Long-term cryostasis. Most of those experiments failed. People died. Horrible deaths. Emily's face was set with determination. But what if this one didn't fail? What if people are still down there, alive, waiting for someone to find them? After 20 years? That's impossible. You said you heard the sounds too, Dad. You know something's down there. David wanted to argue, but she was right. He had heard it. Every night since they'd arrived, the sounds had continued. Sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but always there. Always calling up from the darkness below. That night, David couldn't sleep. He paced their small quarters, his mind racing. He'd spent 20 years following orders. Trust the chain of command. Don't ask questions. Do your job. But where had that gotten him? Discharged with a permanent injury. Mocked by officers who used to respect him. Living in a forgotten station with his daughter because it was all he could afford. Around midnight, he made his way to the operations center. The main terminal was still active, screens glowing softly in the darkness. He sat down and began searching through the files Emily had found. If there was even a chance that people were down there, he had to know. The more he read, the clearer the picture became. Project Sanctuary had been a desperate measure during the darkest days of the war. A sympathetic commander named Phillips had diverted refugee ships to Forward Station Kepler 7, promising them safety. The plan was to put them in cryosleep until the war ended, then revive them and relocate them to proper colonies. But Commander Phillips had died in battle. The secret location of the refugees died with him. And in the chaos of the war's end, Forward Station Kepler 7 was simply forgotten. Sealed up. Written off as abandoned. David's hands were shaking as he pulled up the technical specifications for the lower levels. The cryosystems had been designed with redundant power sources, capable of running for decades if needed. Automated. Self-maintaining. Quietly keeping their precious cargo alive while the universe moved on without them. Dad. He jumped, spinning around to find Emily standing in the doorway. I couldn't sleep either, she said softly. She moved to stand beside him, reading the screen over his shoulder. Are you going to open it? The blast door? David stared at the access panel built into the wall near the sealed entrance. His old military codes might still work. He was technically still registered in the system as authorized personnel, even if he'd been discharged. But opening that door meant disobeying direct orders from command. It meant possibly uncovering something the military wanted to stay buried. It also meant potentially saving lives. A new sound echoed through the station. Not the usual thumping, but something different. The ancient computer system flickered, screens changing without input. Text began scrolling across the main display, green letters on a black background. Life support critical. Power reserves depleting. 47 souls remaining. Please respond. Please help. The blast door opened with a sound like a dying giant, metal grinding against metal after 2 decades of silence. A wave of cold air rushed up from below, carrying the sharp smell of recycled atmosphere and something else. The sterile scent of medical equipment. Of preserved life. David clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. A metal staircase descended into the depths, emergency lighting flickering weakly along the walls. Each step down felt like walking into a tomb. Stay close to me, he told Emily, though she was already gripping the back of his jacket. The temperature dropped with each level they descended. Their breath came out in visible puffs. The walls were lined with frost in places, ice crystals glittering in the flashlight beam. This section of the station was running on minimal power, just enough to keep the essential systems alive. Barely. They reached the bottom level and emerged into a chamber that took David's breath away. It was massive, easily the size of a cargo hangar. And filling every available space were cryopods. Hundreds of them, standing upright in perfect rows like silent sentinels. Most of the pods were dark. Dead. Their occupants long gone, systems failed years ago. But scattered throughout the chamber, 47 pods still glowed with faint blue light. The soft hum of their life support systems created an eerie harmony in the frozen air. Emily moved forward slowly, her eyes wide. Each active pod had a small display panel showing vital signs. Heart rate, brain activity, oxygen levels. All reading in the green but barely. The numbers were far lower than they should be. David's military training kicked in automatically. He moved through the chamber, assessing the situation with practiced efficiency. The main control station was still functional, running on emergency power. He activated the terminal, and data flooded the screen. Oh God, he whispered. Emily joined him at the terminal. What is it? The power reserves. David pointed to the critical readings. The cryosystems have been cannibalizing energy from every possible source for 20 years. Backup generators, solar collectors, even the station's main reactor. But it's not enough anymore. They're failing. How long do they have? David did the calculations in his head, his stomach sinking. 72 hours. Maybe less. Without additional power, the pods will shut down one by one. And when that happens... He didn't need to finish. Emily understood. The people inside would die. After surviving 20 years in frozen sleep, they would die just days after someone finally found them. Emily walked among the pods, reading the nameplates attached to each one. Families mostly. Parents and children frozen together. Elderly couples holding hands through the glass. Young people with their whole lives ahead of them, suspended in this moment of desperate hope. She stopped at one pod near the center of the chamber. The nameplate read Rebecca Brennan, age 14. Inside, a girl Emily's age floated in the preservation fluid, frozen mid-smile. She clutched a small stuffed rabbit to her chest, its worn fur visible even through the frosted glass. "Dad." Emily's voice cracked. "Dad, come here." David limped over, his leg aching from the descent. He looked at the nameplate and felt the world tilt beneath him. Rebecca. His brother Nathan's daughter. His niece. Nathan had died in the war 5 years ago, killed during the defense of the Outer Rim colonies. They told David that Rebecca had been lost too, caught in the refugee chaos. Presumed dead. No body recovered. Case closed. But she'd been here. Right here. Sleeping peacefully while David grieved. While he blamed himself for not protecting his brother's family. While he moved on with his life, never knowing she was just meters away, waiting for someone to find her. David's legs gave out. He collapsed against the pod, pressing both hands against the cold glass. His niece's face was peaceful, innocent, frozen at the exact same age as Emily. She should be 19 now. Should be grown up, living her life. Instead, she was trapped in this moment, neither living nor dead. "I walked away," David said, his voice breaking. 5 years ago, after Nathan died, Command ordered all units to abandon this sector. I followed orders. I didn't question it. I just left. Tears ran down his face, freezing in the cold air. "You were right here, Becca. You were right here and I abandoned you." Emily knelt beside her father, wrapping her arms around him. She'd never seen him like this. Even when her mother died, even through all the pain and loss, he'd stayed strong. But this was different. This was a wound that had been hidden for years, suddenly torn open. "Dad, you didn't know. Nobody knew. I should have known. I should have searched. I should have questioned the orders." He looked up at the rows of pods, at all the other families frozen in time. How many other people are down here? How many other families did we abandon? Emily accessed the terminal, pulling up the registry. The names scrolled past. The Wilson family from New Terra. The Johnsons from Kepler Station. The Rodriguez family from Mars Colony. 47 people total. Teachers, engineers, doctors, children. Regular people who'd been caught in the chaos of war and promised safety. Promised rescue. A promise that was never kept. David pulled himself together, wiping his eyes. He moved back to the control terminal and began typing rapidly. "I'm sending an emergency request to Central Command. Full medical evacuation. Priority 1. They can't ignore this." They waited through the 6-hour communication lag, David pacing the length of the chamber while Emily sat beside Rebecca's pod, talking softly to her frozen cousin about everything she'd missed. School. Friends. The way the stars looked from their old colony. Small, normal things. When the response finally came through, David's hands clenched into fists as he read it. "What does it say?" Emily asked. David's voice was hollow. "Negative. Station scheduled for demolition next month as per decommissioning protocol. Personnel are ordered to evacuate immediately. No resources available for recovery operation. Survivors are listed as legally deceased. Case file closed." "What?" Emily jumped to her feet. "They can't just leave them here to die. They can and they are." David stared at the message in disbelief. To Command, these people don't exist. They've been dead on paper for 20 years. Reviving them means admitting to Project Sanctuary. Admitting they forgot about them. It's a political nightmare. So they're just going to blow up the station with them still inside? Emily's voice rose in anger. "That's murder." David looked at his daughter, then at Rebecca's pod, then at all the other sleeping souls filling the chamber. 47 people. 47 lives that no one else cared about because saving them was inconvenient. Because it was easier to bury mistakes than fix them. For 20 years he'd followed orders. He'd trusted the system. He'd believed that the chain of command knew best. But standing in this frozen chamber surrounded by the forgotten and the abandoned, something fundamental shifted inside him. He deleted the message from command. "What are you doing?" Emily asked. David pulled up the station's technical manuals, his mind already racing through possibilities. We're going to save them. All of them. How? We don't have the power to revive them and Command won't send help. Then we'll get the power ourselves. David's jaw set with determination. I'm done following orders that abandon people. I'm done trusting a system that treats lives like statistics. He looked at his daughter. Your mother always said that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same. I never understood what she meant until now. Emily smiled, the first real smile since they'd arrived at this station. What do we do? David began pulling up schematics and power calculations. We're going to steal what we need. And we're going to wake them up before Command has any idea what we're doing. In the frozen chamber, Rebecca Brennan slept on, unaware that her uncle had finally found her. Unaware that after 20 years of waiting, rescue was finally coming. Not from the military that abandoned her, but from a broken soldier and his daughter who refused to look away. David and Emily worked through the night like their lives depended on it. Because 47 other lives actually did. The control room became their war room, screens glowing with power calculations, system schematics and revival protocols that David barely understood but was determined to master. The cryopods need a massive power surge to safely revive someone, David explained, pointing to the technical manual on the screen. It's not like flipping a switch. The body has to be warmed gradually, carefully. Brain activity needs to be monitored. Organs have to restart in the right sequence. One mistake and we could kill them instead of saving them. Emily absorbed everything, taking notes on her tablet. She'd always been smart, but watching her now, David realized just how brilliant his daughter really was. She asked questions he hadn't thought of, spotted problems in his plans before he did, and suggested solutions with a clarity that amazed him. The station's reactor can't generate enough power, she said, studying the numbers. Even at maximum output, we'd only have enough for maybe 3 or 4 revivals. And that's if nothing goes wrong. David nodded grimly. He'd already done the math. That's why we need an external power source. He pulled up a navigation chart showing the asteroid belt around forward station Kepler 7. Several shipping lanes passed through the area, cargo haulers and transport ships moving between the inner colonies and the frontier worlds. The station's old tractor beam array was designed to catch asteroids for mining operations, but David had a different use in mind. We're going to drain power from passing ships, he said. Emily's eyes widened. Dad, that's piracy. That's seriously illegal. I know. David met her gaze steadily. I'm asking you to help me break the law. If you're not comfortable with that, I understand. But I can't do this alone. Emily looked at the screen, then back at the chamber where 47 people slept in their frozen pods. Where her cousin Rebecca waited for a rescue that should have come 20 years ago. She squared her shoulders. Let's be pirates then. Over the next 2 days they modified the tractor beam array. David's hands remembered the work even if his mind struggled with the technical details. 20 years of military engineering came flooding back. Bypassing safety protocols. Rerouting power conduits. Making old systems do things they were never designed to do. Emily handled the software side, writing code to disguise their power drain as routine system fluctuations. If they did it right, ships wouldn't even notice they were being siphoned. If they did it wrong, every ship in the sector would know exactly what they were doing. Their first attempt was a disaster. A cargo hauler passed within range, and David activated the tractor beam. The ship's shields were too strong. The beam bounced off harmlessly, and they got nothing but a warning alarm as the station's systems overloaded. We need bigger targets, Emily said, already pulling up shipping schedules. Commercial freighters have stronger shields. But colony transports? They run with minimal shielding to save on power costs. The second attempt went better. They managed to drain enough power from a transport ship to fill the station's backup batteries to 30%. But it also triggered the ship's security systems. Within minutes, they received an automated distress call reporting hostile activity at forward station Kepler 7. David's heart sank as he read the message forwarded from Central Command. Explain the reported tractor beam activation immediately. Unauthorized weapons discharge will result in criminal charges. What do we do? Emily asked, her voice tight with worry. David stared at the message, his mind racing. They needed more power. A lot more. But every ship they targeted would report them. Command would send someone to investigate. They'd find the cryo chamber. And instead of rescuing the 47 souls below, they'd probably seal the station back up and arrest David for disobeying orders. We need to change tactics, he said slowly. Instead of stealing power, we need ships to give it to us willingly. Emily frowned. How do we do that? We tell them the truth. David began typing a new message. We broadcast an emergency beacon. A legitimate distress call. Ships are legally required to respond to distress signals. When they arrive to offer assistance, we explain what we're doing. We ask for their help. And if they refuse? Then we're out of options. David sent the broadcast on all emergency frequencies. This is Forward Station Kepler 7 declaring a humanitarian emergency. We have discovered 47 civilians in cryostasis requiring immediate medical power assistance. Any vessels in range, please respond. The wait was agonizing. For 3 hours, nothing. David paced the control room while Emily monitored the revival protocols. The cryopods were down to 60 hours of power. Time was running out. Then responses started coming in. First one ship. Then 3. Then a dozen. Within 6 hours, multiple vessels had altered course toward their station. The largest was a colony transport called the New Horizon, carrying supplies to the outer territories. Captain Walsh's face appeared on the communication screen. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. Forward Station Kepler 7, this is Captain Walsh of the New Horizon. Did I hear you correctly? You found people in cryosleep? 47 civilians, Captain, David said. Refugees from the frontier collapse. They've been here for 20 years. We need power to revive them before their pods fail. There was a long pause. David could see Walsh conferring with someone off-screen. Finally, the captain looked back at the camera. Brennan, I was part of the refugee fleet 20 years ago. We were told everyone who didn't make it onto the evacuation ships was lost. You're saying some of them survived? Yes, sir. But not for much longer without help. Another pause. Then Walsh nodded slowly. How much power do you need? Over the next 12 hours, ships began arriving. The New Horizon docked first, running power cables directly into the station. 2 cargo haulers positioned themselves nearby, feeding energy through their tractor beams. A scientific research vessel offered its medical bay and a doctor who specialized in cryo-revival. David initiated the revival sequence with trembling hands. Emily stood beside him at the control panel, monitoring 47 sets of vital signs. The cryopods began their carefully programmed warming cycle. Inside each one, frozen bodies slowly came back to life. Then Rebecca's pod threw an error. Temperature rising too fast. Tissue damage imminent. Alarms screamed through the chamber. David's heart stopped. He had seconds to make an impossible choice. He could divert extra power to Rebecca's pod, stabilizing her revival with certainty. But that meant pulling power from the other pods, risking their carefully balanced revival sequences. His niece's life versus the lives of strangers. His hand moved toward the override controls. Emily grabbed his wrist. Dad, no. It's Rebecca. Nathan's daughter. I can't lose her again. She wouldn't want you to risk everyone else to save her. Emily's voice was steady, mature beyond her years. That's not who the Brennans are. We save everyone or we save no one. David looked at his daughter, seeing so much of her mother in that moment. The same fierce compassion. The same unwavering moral compass. He pulled his hand back from the override. Instead, he pushed the station to its absolute limits. He rerouted every spare joule of power, overrode every safety protocol, and demanded more from the dying systems than they were ever meant to give. The station groaned and shook. Hull plates buckled. Warning lights flashed red across every console. Captain Walsh's voice crackled over the comm. Brennan, what are you doing? Your station's tearing itself apart. Saving them all, David said through gritted teeth. One by one, the cryopods began to open. Preservation fluid drained away. 47 chests began to rise and fall with their first breaths in 20 years. Hearts that had barely beaten for 2 decades started pumping steadily. Minds that had been locked in frozen dreams slowly awakened to reality. Rebecca's pod stabilized. The alarms went silent. David sagged against the control panel, exhausted and relieved beyond words. But even as the survivors began to wake, new alarms blared throughout the station. Emily pulled up the sensor display, her face going pale. Dad, we have incoming. Military cruiser. They're broadcasting an order for us to cease all operations immediately. David looked at the screen. A warship was entering the system, moving fast. And they clearly weren't here to help. The medical bay filled with the sounds of confused voices and crying. 47 people who'd closed their eyes during the worst days of the war were now opening them to find themselves in a future they never imagined. Some were disoriented, calling out for family members. Others simply wept with relief at being alive. David moved through the chaos with blankets and water bottles, Emily right beside him. They helped people sit up, steadied those who couldn't walk on their own, offered comfort to those who were terrified and confused. The doctor from the research vessel worked frantically, checking vital signs and administering medications to ease the transition. Then David heard a weak voice that made his heart stop. "Uncle David?" Rebecca stood on shaky legs, still clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were unfocused, her dark hair matted from the preservation fluid. But she was awake. She was alive. David crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She felt so fragile, so small. The same height as Emily but weighing almost nothing after 20 years in cryo-sleep. "I've got you, Becca," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've got you now. You're safe." "Where's Dad?" Rebecca asked, her words slurred from the revival drugs. "Where's my father? He said he'd come back for me." David closed his eyes, holding her tighter. How do you tell a 14-year-old girl that her father died 5 years ago? That she'd been asleep so long, the world had moved on without her? "We'll talk about everything," he said gently. "But right now you need to rest. You're with family. That's what matters." Around them, other reunions were happening. A mother and father finding each other after being separated during evacuation. An elderly couple holding hands, tears streaming down their faces as they realized they'd made it through together. Children calling for parents, siblings finding each other. The joy was overwhelming. Captain Walsh's crew had beamed over with medical supplies and food. Real food, not the rehydrated rations David and Emily had been living on. The survivors ate slowly, carefully, their bodies not ready for much after so long in stasis. Walsh himself approached David, shaking his hand firmly. "You did something incredible here, Brennan. These people owe you their lives." "I just did what anyone should have done," David said. "But no one else did. Command abandoned them. Hell, I was part of the refugee fleet and I never knew anyone was left behind." Walsh's expression darkened. "Speaking of command, that military cruiser is almost here. What are you going to tell them?" David had been trying not to think about it. He'd violated direct orders. Activated unauthorized systems. Essentially committed piracy by draining power from ships. And worst of all, he'd exposed a military secret that Command clearly wanted buried. "I'll tell them the truth," he said. "And accept whatever consequences come." The cruiser docked an hour later. Commander Patterson stepped through the airlock with 6 armed security personnel. He was a tall man with iron-gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. His uniform was spotless, his posture rigid with military precision. "David Brennan," Patterson's voice echoed through the station. "You are in direct violation of multiple regulations. Unauthorized access to restricted areas. Disobeying direct orders from Central Command. Operating station systems without proper authorization. And interfering with commercial vessel operations." David stood his ground. "Yes, sir. I did all those things. These people should have remained in stasis until proper facilities could be arranged." Patterson gestured at the survivors. "You've created a diplomatic nightmare. Project Sanctuary was classified for a reason. They would have died in 3 days," David said flatly. "The cryopods were failing. There was no time for proper facilities. That's not your decision to make. You're a civilian caretaker, not a commanding officer." Patterson pulled out a data pad. "These survivors need to be returned to cryostasis immediately and transferred to a secure medical facility where this situation can be handled properly." David felt ice in his veins. He understood what Patterson was really saying. The survivors would be put back to sleep, transferred somewhere secret and quietly disappeared. Buried under paperwork and classified orders. Just like they'd been buried here for 20 years. "No," David said. Patterson's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "I said no." David stepped between Patterson and the medical bay where the survivors rested. "I'm done following orders that abandon people. These men, women, and children have already lost 20 years of their lives. I won't let you take any more from them." Emily moved to stand beside her father. Then Rebecca, still weak but determined, joined them. One by one, the survivors who could stand rose from their beds and formed a line behind David. Some could barely walk. Others leaned on each other for support. But they stood together. Captain Walsh and his crew stepped forward too. "These people need medical care and integration support," Walsh said. "Not more imprisonment." Even some of Patterson's own security team looked uncomfortable. One younger officer lowered his weapon slightly, his face conflicted. Patterson's jaw clenched. "Brennan, stand down. That's an order." I'm not under your command anymore, sir. Remember? I'm just a washed-up civilian. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Patterson reached for his sidearm. The station's communication system suddenly exploded with activity. Emily had been recording everything, and she'd broadcast it on every open channel in the sector. News feeds, social media, public forums. The whole frontier was watching this confrontation in real time. Patterson froze, his hand on his weapon. Screens throughout the station lit up with incoming messages. Journalists demanding interviews. Colony representatives asking questions. Civil rights organizations calling for investigations. The story was spreading like wildfire across human space. A message came through from Central Command itself. Patterson listened through his earpiece, his face going from red to pale. When he finished, he looked at David with something between fury and grudging respect. New orders, Patterson said stiffly. The survivors are to receive full medical care, citizenship restoration, and financial restitution for their ordeal. This incident will be reviewed by an independent committee. He paused. You just ended a lot of careers, Brennan. Including mine. David met his gaze evenly. Maybe the officers who replace you will remember that conscience matters more than following convenient orders. Patterson and his team left without another word. The tension drained from the room, replaced by exhausted relief. Rebecca collapsed against David, and he held her up. Over the following weeks, the survivors were gradually transferred to proper medical facilities. Some had families still alive who came to claim them. Others, like Rebecca, had lost everyone and needed new homes. Support networks formed, volunteer organizations stepped up, and slowly the 47 forgotten souls began rebuilding their lives. Forward Station Kepler 7 was no longer scheduled for demolition. Instead, it was being converted into a refugee assistance center and memorial. Emily and Rebecca worked together, setting up databases to search for other forgotten installations, other sealed stations where people might still be waiting. Lieutenant Harris returned one last time before his reassignment to a colony world far from anywhere important. He found David in the control room staring out at the stars. I was wrong about you, Harris said quietly. When I called you washed up, when I said you couldn't hack it anymore. I was wrong. David turned to face him. You were following the example set by command. We all were. Maybe. But you stopped following when following meant abandoning people. Harris extended his hand. Thank you for showing us what we forgot, Sergeant. David shook his hand. Just doing what anyone should do. That night, David found Emily and Rebecca asleep at a terminal, still researching, still searching for others who might need help. He covered them both with blankets and looked at the photo they'd printed and stuck to the wall. All 47 survivors together, smiling, alive, surrounded by the people who'd saved them. His service medal sat in a drawer somewhere, forgotten. But here on the wall was something more valuable. Proof that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't following orders. It's refusing to follow them when they're wrong. David thought about Lieutenant Harris's words. About the officers who'd mocked him for taking this posting. About the system that had tried to bury its mistakes rather than fix them. They'd all seen him as a failure. A washed-up soldier babysitting garbage in space. But they'd been wrong. This wasn't the end of his service. It was the beginning of something more important. A reminder that being a soldier wasn't about following orders blindly. It was about protecting people. All people. Even the forgotten ones. Rebecca stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about her father. Emily reached out instinctively and took her hand, offering comfort even while dreaming. David looked at both girls and felt something he hadn't felt in years. The station groaned and creaked around him, but it wasn't the sound of something dying anymore. It was the sound of something living. Something that mattered. A light in the darkness for anyone who'd been left behind. And David Brennan, the soldier they'd mocked for taking the old base, smiled. Because they'd finally found what this place was meant to be all along. Not a graveyard. A sanctuary. A place where hope refused to die.